Welcome back to another episode from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Doc Jen.
And I'm Dr. Dom.
And today we're talking about osteoporosis and how it relates to exercise. What are the considerations that we need to take into place from two doctors of physical therapy? Now, before we dive into what are some things that we need to be aware of and how can we improve osteoporosis, we do want to say, don't forget to leave comments below. Do you have questions? Do you have other concerns? Do you have other topics you want us to cover? This is where we get our topics, is based on your requests. So make sure that you drop them below in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on any other videos that I might post beyond just these PT plays.
Okay, today talking about osteoporosis, which we haven't done a podcast on yet, right? And yeah, kind of surprised, honestly, when you brought that up, because it's so prevalent, especially in women. You know, so many women as they age start to develop reduced bone density. There was something that you looked at that said in the UK, this was over 1/3 of women and 1/5 of men will sustain what they called a fragility fracture in their lifetime, which essentially means a fracture that is likely due to lower bone density. If you had normal levels of bone density, the fall or whatever it was wouldn't have fractured that bone, which is pretty significant. 1/3 of women, 1/5 of men.
That's hugely significant.
20 to 30% of people.
Yeah, another study kind of looked at, like, globally, about 200 million women have osteoporosis. And so this is a huge topic. This is a huge consideration. And even I did a webinar where we kind of talked about this, and one person in particular on the webinar had been diagnosed with osteopenia, so not yet to osteoporosis. And her only recommendation from the doctor was to take calcium. That was it. I was like, and there was nothing else said in that
Which
discussion.
Is that's so crazy. And to me, the old school, like, if that was his only recommendation and not even saying, like, let's see a different professional, like a physical therapist or somebody who, like, there's so much research now showing things that can be done to either stop or reverse, developing of osteoporosis.
Well, and we also know, this is me speaking as a physical therapist, this is outside my scope of practice, but just taking calcium is not enough. So this is where working with an RD and actually understanding the absorption and how you get more calcium and other nutrients that need to be involved, or what you could be lacking, is so highly beneficial to also help improve this bone mineral density.
But your body's not going to do anything with just excess calcium unless you're stimulating bone growth.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be stimulating bone growth, and taking calcium alone doesn't stimulate our osteoclasts and osteoblasts to start remodeling of the bone. So it's just like, again, just taking extra calcium isn't going to do anything for you unless you're doing some other things along with it, like you said, nutrition wise and movement wise.
Yeah. And I think it's really fascinating to look at, these bone mineral density changes throughout the lifespan. So not just in older women, right? But especially for a female when estrogen levels are low. And we can be looking at this, again, throughout the lifespan. So if you are on fertility treatments, you're taking fertility medication, you're taking endometriosis medication, that can lower your estrogen levels. If you are postpartum and you are lactating, you are breastfeeding, that can lower your estrogen levels, and especially postmenopause. So all of these different changes throughout a woman's life can lower our estrogen, which impacts our bone mineral density. And this is where we have to be even more cognizant and aware of what we're doing to aid within our body.
Yeah, those little babies are like little calcium leeches, little bone leeches.
Just taking everything.
Jeepers. Okay, so where to go from here? Like, we're obviously going to talk more on the exercise side of things.
Yes.
Again, if this is you, there are definite considerations. If you're in one of those stages, like Jen said, where you're going to have low estrogen, that's going to affect our bone density or be leaching calcium from our bone because of deficiencies elsewhere. That's where there could be nutrition considerations that you'd want to talk with someone who knows what the heck they're talking about. But on the exercise thing, what stimulates bone growth? And I want to specifically talk about it more like bone remodeling, because we never really there are two specific cells, are osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Osteoblasts, I always remembered because they blast the old bone away. They're the people who come in and they're like, get rid of that old demineralized bone. And the osteoclasts are the one who create the new bone. And so it's this remodeling process of taking away the old, putting in the new. And how do we stimulate these is through load. Is when our bones feel load put through them, they're going to start to remodel in a way that responds to that load. And that's like a basic physiologic principle of bone.
Right. And there's something called Wolff's Law, which I like to bring up only because it states that our bones will adapt according to the demands placed on them. And that means the demand of load that we're placing on them and the demand we're not placing on them. So our bones will, yes, exactly. So our bones will change if we're not loading them enough. And I think that's where we can see those significant changes and why it's important.
You brought this up in the last PT Pro we did on exercises for longevity. Like if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's essentially what Wolff's Law is saying. It says, if you don't use it, you lose it. If you use it a lot,
you're going to improve it.
Yeah, it will improve a lot. And again, how osteoporosis is seen as this age-related thing, I don't completely agree with that. Yes, there are things that happen through our lifespan that definitely have impact on our bone density. However, something that we consistently see through lifespan is just a reduction in the amount of activity we do, a reduction in the amount of loading we do on our system, both with weights or just with like regular daily activity. And so again, if you are given the recommendation because you have significant osteoporosis by your doctor, like, oh, you shouldn't do lifting, you shouldn't do heavy exercise because you're going to be at risk of fracture. Again, there is always that risk.
Yes.
And we should always be working with a professional if we have significant amounts of osteoporosis,
100%.
Because there are definite considerations that could increase or reduce risk of fracture when doing different activities. But to tell you that you're not supposed to load your body is almost going to be more detrimental.
100%, because if the end all goal is to prevent fracture, then we have to prevent fall, right? And in order to prevent fall
and prevent the bones from losing more density.
Right. And so in order to prevent that, we actually have to do the opposite. We need to strengthen. We need to impact our bones. We need to work on balance. We need to work on all these systems of the body to help prevent what ultimately we don't want to happen. And so that's where clinically the most effective physical exercise for the individual will be the highest intensity that they can tolerate. That is clinically proven within the research right now. So it's not just, oh, okay, you have osteoporosis, do some low impact exercise or go do some aerobic activity. No, it's literally getting you into the highest intensity that you can tolerate is what's actually going to help to improve.
And so there's multiple ways to get this high load through the body. Like, first of all, we want to be axially loading our skeleton, which basically means top to bottom. Like if you look at the long bone of your arm or your leg, it's essentially loading from hip to foot with a straight leg. A lot of ways to do this. Like most people will think initially of loading, like weightlifting. Yes, that's one way. That's definitely one way to put weight through our body, but almost more effective is things that put impact through our body or impulse. Something that is like the lowest level of this is doing heel drops, or what we call a heel drop, where you kind of go up on your toes. I like this because you can even hold onto a counter, go up on your toes and kind of just drop down on your heels, and you'll feel kind of that impulse up through the body. And doing that 5 or 10 times, that's like a really base level way to start putting that impulse through the body.
And then obviously this is where it comes into play of like why we don't want to lose impact as we continue to age is because we need this in order to help improve our bone density. And so this is where any kind of jumping that you can tolerate, and the more stiff-legged we actually land, the more we put that axial compression through our bones and the more benefit that we get. So especially when we're younger and we can still do and tolerate landing and loading our body at high intensities, do that right now. So it's not just the box jump, right? But it's actually getting off of the box and landing, not stiff-legged. We don't want to injure ourselves, but almost, right? And getting that really high load.
Well, and that's like what you
body.
progress to. So it's like the heel drop is the very bottom of the spectrum. Yeah. The very top is jumping off a box and trying to land more stiff-legged.
Right.
Or hanging from a bar and letting go and trying to land with more stiff legs, because again, that's a very high level of impact, where in between is jumping off the box and landing with a deep squat, and then like progressively going towards a more stiff-legged landing. Honestly, this is stuff that is a principle of plyometric training too. That's really good for our ligaments, our joints. You know, you do this with everyone as they go through ACL rehab, like learning to decelerate your body quicker, which is that more stiff-legged method. But that's where you're going to get the highest levels of impact and stimulate those osteoclasts and osteoblasts to do their bone remodeling.
And then when it comes to lifting and strength, from the research we see that osteoporosis only improves by safely increasing load. And so this first happens when we improve our technique in lifting, and then slowly and with supervision improve load over time. And this means that we're getting up to, think of like your 1 rep max, so like as much load as you can lift one time, you're getting up to about 85% of that 1 rep max, which is pretty dang heavy. And again, heavy is all relative to everyone. Heavy can be your body weight. Heavy could be a resistance band. It doesn't have to mean a barbell loading, but it means that you're getting yourself to a pretty high intense load within a rep. And if you're going to go a little bit lighter with the load in general, say that doesn't get you to your 85%, then you're doing higher volume that gets you closer to failure at the end of the set, right? So maybe instead of doing 6 to 8 reps of a really heavy load, I'm doing a lighter load, but I'm doing 15 plus reps, and that's getting me to close to failure by the end. That is what's going to help to ultimately start to improve that strength. And I want to go back to that point one more time. Technique. If we can improve our form, if we can improve our technique, we reduce the risk and fear of injury. And that's what most people fear when it comes to lifting or heavier or doing more strength training, right? Is that fear of injury.
There's this one specific product. I think of it because my Auntie Lorinda always talks about it. Auntie Lorinda is someone who's dealt with, lower bone density and has been trying to work on that and went through all sorts of different solutions. And then she found an OsteoStrong Gym, which is essentially they're machines that were designed to do this axial loading on you in a safe way that gets multiples and multiples of your body weight. The founder of OsteoStrong said you need 4.2 multiples of your body weight at the hip joint specifically, to see improvements in bone density. Do we specifically agree with that? That it needs to be 4.2 times. Like, I'm sure you'll see some improvements in density, but these machines have shown pretty incredible results. My Auntie Lorinda swears by them because they take advantage of the body's physiology. The body can't ignore when you load it like that. Wolf's Law.
100%. And what I looked at too when I was looking deeper into OsteoStrong is that they recommend doing it for at least 6 months to 12 months. So you're doing it for an extended period of time. Again, this only takes 10 to 12 minutes. So it's not a long process that you're going in and doing. But it always should be combined with strength training. And they say that, because you're doing axial load at a really high force on your body doesn't mean that you're gaining strength. So they also at OsteoStrong recommend a strength training program alongside this axial loading, which I think is a great recommendation and something that's so highly needed because, again, we're trying to prevent the fall. We're trying to get you stronger. We're trying to make sure that you're increasing your overall body support. And I think it's important to note that going into an OsteoStrong is a privilege because I don't think insurance covers it, and it does cost money. So if that is not what you're able to do, we're going to go over a study that has actually been researched in some exercises that can actually be beneficial.
So this exercise that they called Lift More, which I think is appropriate, essentially it was this training for muscle and osteoporosis rehabilitation. And it was an 8-month supervised high intensity and progressive resistance and impact training program. So it combined HIIT and strength training, which, as we've said, are two components that can get that impulse and the multiples of your body weight going through your bones to help to stimulate that bone density growth.
Yeah, and they saw improvements in femoral neck and lumbar spine bone mass density, which I think are the main places that people are concerned, plus muscle strength, physical function in specifically postmenopausal women with low to very low bone mass density, which I think is really cool. And I think the study was out of Australia, which of course.
And this was 8 months, but just 2 times a week, 30-minute sessions. Again, intensity, they use RPE scale, which is the rate of perceived exertion, which is the best scale to use, even over heart rate, because not a lot of people just measuring your heart rate as you're doing workouts isn't great. But if you use an RPE scale, and again, they have confusing RPE scales. There's one from 6 to 20, which doesn't make sense to me as much as just using 1 to 10. If you're looking at a 1 to 10 scale, you should be at about an 8. Be like, this is one of the harder workouts that I could do, but 10 is like, I'm going to pass out. And so, 2 times a week, 30 minutes, and they saw all these improvements over 8 months. So yes, it's a long time, but again, We're trying to combat changes that have either been happening for decades of our life or combat the changes that otherwise might happen decades down the road.
Yeah. And some of the exercises they focused on, which are we all need throughout life, is the deadlift, squat, overhead press, and impact loading. So they did like jumping chin-ups, and they would kind of jump and pull up on the bar and let go, right? And eventually they're working their way toward more of that stiff-legged landing. Now, I do believe that this protocol was also combined with machine-based axial loading. So they did use axial loading to help with this entire rehabilitation process. So again, if you can or get access to it, or your insurance pays a little bit, like see what you can do, to help to gain that, because that has been proven to be helpful. But also, if you can't, just at least your strength training, at least you're working more toward those stiff-legged landings and impact, and you're doing what you can while also working on balance training to help reduce the risk of falls and to continue to age well within your body.
And wanting to do that with a group,
yeah.
Today we are starting our Strong Healthy Joints program,
yes.
which is a strength-based program that works on top-end strength. So doing the 80 to 85% of your 1 rep max for multiple reps, that's going to be a part of this program. And we're starting today with a large group that's in our Gen Health community. And the early bird discount is over, but as our podcast guests, we always want you to be treated well. So you can use code OPTIMAL20 and you'd actually get the program still at the early bird price. It'll give you an extra $20 off, and you can come start with us today. It includes high, top end strength training as well as the high intensity workouts. Jen gives variations for everyone,
modifications for
modifications,
everything.
variations,
home
no matter
workout,
what level you're at. So check that out. Links down in the show notes. It's jen.health/strong. Use code OPTIMAL20 at checkout and come join us. Thanks for joining us for another episode all about osteoporosis. Did you learn anything? Did you have any other questions? Make sure you drop them down below. Have you heard of anything else that people should be doing if they have osteoporosis or are worried about their bone density? Let us know. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell before you go, and we'll see you next time.